Well, you should know that advance polls are open today and will be available tomorrow and Monday as well if you want to get a head start on this year's election. So how are the contenders faring just a week and a half left in this campaign? Just this week, a spate of polls showed surging support nationally for the NDP and particularly in Quebec, a potential momentum swing that could change the campaign's dynamics in these closing days. Our Dave Taylor joins us now to help make sense of all these poll numbers. No doubt about it, the NDP was the big story this past week. Over a week ago, we were talking about a bounce in support for the NDP. Now it's a surge, not just in Quebec. What are we to make of all of this, and how might it change the final days?
Well, let's take a look at the big board here and the CBC poll tracker, which is on the Canada Votes website if you want to go take a look.
Cool.
And you'll have a peek at all of the numbers from the big polling companies. Now, there we go. Now, it's you're going to need a magnifying glass for us to see it in the studio here.
Well,
but
you walk us through it.
What I want to point you to and the viewers to look at here, Nancy, is just that orange line that's on each poll, and the two on Ecos and Nanos in particular. You see the drift up. The orange drift up toward the red. So the NDP rise toward the red over the last little while. And what that tells you, of course, is on the headline number nationally, there's been, they're coming together. So that is at the expense of the Bloc in Quebec, and to a certain extent at the expense of Greens and Liberals in the rest of the country. But the Quebec story is the big part of it. The other point I want to make to you is that blue line hasn't moved.
Interesting. So
the Conservatives are sitting there, depending on which poll you're looking at, in the mid to upper 30s, even low 40s in some, looking down on all this churn and turmoil in the battle for Stornoway, and thinking, okay, and when all is said and done, we're still in first.
Right. Very, very interesting. So these numbers, of course, have us all wondering whether this is a kind of political realignment that we're witnessing. But typically, in election campaigns at this stage of the game, the kind of voter support we're seeing for whichever party, is it fluid at all? Is it volatile? Do a lot of people change their minds between now and voting day?
Well, when you look at the top line number with the Conservatives, Nancy, what the pollsters are saying is that that's a very committed base. So if you're Stephen Harper, you're looking at a pretty solid between, in the lower to mid 30s. They're showing up for you. Right. If you're Michael Ignatieff and the Liberals and Jack Layton and the NDP, there's a lot of swapping going on. Voters thinking 1 week, yeah, 1 week, and they're, in essence, they're fighting for the same turf. And that gives a huge advantage to the Conservatives, knowing what they have in their back pocket. And this, again, these two parties fighting for scraps. Add Quebec into the mix, where you have something that really none of us who have been following elections for the last couple of decades have any experience with the NDP making a move into places that we'd never even thought of possible. We went into this campaign thinking that Gilles Duceppe was unassailable. Well, it turns out that's not the case. And what we need to find a way of understanding is what the NDP at 30% means. Is it mile wide, inch deep? Is it concentrated? Does it translate into seats? Does it take away from the Liberals? Does it take away from the Conservatives?
Exactly.
It's this whole game of splits. And political junkies and parties right across, all of them are kind of sitting there trying to carve it up.
Yeah, trying to figure out the scenarios that are whirling fast and furious right now. So we've been talking about the snapshot of voter support right now, but we also know that, of course, particularly when you look at the national picture, being in the lead nationally doesn't necessarily translate into winning seats. So how do we determine that these poll numbers and how they might translate?
The $64 question, I was just talking about the way splits work. All the parties understand here that this election initially was being thought of as a battle over essentially 40 seats. For the Conservative, this is about winning 12 seats that they didn't have before and getting to 155. And for the other parties, it seems to be a matter of trying to keep them from doing that. So how this translates, there's an emotional argument here to be made too. In Quebec, we have seen twice in the last 50 years, in 1958 and 1984, where the entire federal herd just picked up and moved from one party to another and created a sweep. We saw it provincially with the ADQ, where it was like, where the heck did this come from? A huge chunk of the herd in Francophone Quebec picked up and moved to another party. Now, in watching Quebec right now, the $64 question is, does the herd move?
Right. So much to watch for. Fascinating for sure. Dave, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us and guiding us through the numbers.
You're welcome.